Welcome back to Storytime with Scott Boss. Today we're going to read part 4 of the Graveyard Gazette. Chapter 4. Carrie's shower felt invigorating. He still needed the coffee, but getting the mud off him and some clean clothes on made a huge difference. When he stepped into the living room, he realized how much work he had to do. He wished he'd just planned to meet her at Starbucks, but without a phone, he could only hope to catch her there and possibly miss her. It had been a while since he'd had people over to the house. Bruce and Johnny came to watch the Super Bowl back in February, and that may have been the last time. It was right after Laura left and was probably out of pity. He noticed the box his old sweatshirt had come in sitting on the table. He collected it and found the sweatshirt on the floor, tucking it back into the box and tossing it in his room. When he came back out, he saw the guppies, both floating at the top of the tank. "Mother," he said. They'd been eating fine before he left. Still, dead fish were not a good look. He scooped them out and flushed them, then moved the tank to his shower and dumped the whole thing. Some of the fishy water splashed on his shirt, which he sniffed a few times, then took off, threw on the top of the tank inside the shower, and found another to put on. He went back to the kitchen. There were dishes in the sink that were probably going to stay there. The living room needed to look less like a depressed psycho lived there and more like, well, what? Just clean something, he thought. Carrie moved around the room with nervous speed and collecting blankets, cups, food containers, and anything he could make it a little more inviting. The kitchen didn't benefit from the influx of more dishes, but it was what it was. He got the living room looking halfway hospitable, then closed his bedroom door. About 10 minutes later, headlights lit up his driveway. Carrie sat on the porch, stubbing out a half-smoked cigarette into a makeshift coffee cup ashtray. He waved at the car, blinded by the lights until they went off. Angela popped up holding two fall-colored cups with the Starbucks logo on them. She held his out, and she met him on the porch. "Smells good," said Carrie. "Yeah, they weren't too busy tonight." There was a beat of silence before he decided it was time, whether or not he was ready. "Want to come in?" Carrie led them into the living room and motioned to the couch. "Have a seat. Sorry, it's not very clean in here. Kind of living the bachelor's life, you know." "I've seen worse," said Angela. She found a spot on one end of the couch while Carrie took the other side. "So," said Carrie, "where did we leave off? The school?" Angela took a drink and set her cup on the worn coffee table in front of the couch, matching up the bottom of her cup with a stained ring that was already there. "Right." She pulled her thoughts out of the air. "So, Maya and I found an apartment that wanted proof of employment. The school wanted a copy of my degree to officially offer me the position, and the college said it would be sent to my address, which I didn't have, in 4 to 6 weeks. In the end, it took about a week of me getting everyone to talk to each other to get it all worked out, while Maya and I lived out of the car and used truck stop bathrooms to shower in. I barely had the money for the first and last month's rent, along with keeping us fed. I couldn't afford a hotel, and the food we ate during that period, including the first few weeks waiting to get paid, it's not something I'd like to talk about." She shivered, pausing at the memory, and Carrie wondered what part she was leaving out. "I enrolled her in childcare at the place across from the school. It was cheap. Let's leave it at that. It seemed like Maya had a cough or runny nose for those first 2 years until she started kindergarten. Then she just had one here and there instead." Angela picked up her coffee and took another drink, deep in thought. Carrie gave her some time until she finally sighed and looked up at him. "I don't think I'm up for telling all the years in between. There were good ones and bad ones. Let me skip ahead a bit. When I hit my 30s, I finally met a man I thought was worth dating. I'd moved up to this area after getting the job at Madison Middle. Maya was 13 at that point, pretty self-sufficient, and I'd been doing it on my own for so long, I just hadn't thought about dating. Don't get me wrong, Maya and I were not getting along great. I wasn't some super mother coming home from my teaching job, reading her books and doing homework. No, I was spent. The days were hard work. I regretted leaving the school in Virginia, but the pay was better and our housing situation improved. Daryl Mayar was a single father and one of the kids in my class. We'd met at the parent-teacher conferences and other school functions. He asked me for my number during a homeroom dance where he volunteered to be a chaperone for. He had a daughter and she'd hit the age where boys had probably entered the picture, but wasn't sure how to bring up the subject. He felt like spying on her at the dance would be the best method, and who was I to judge? I had no clue how to raise Maya. I declined his request initially, telling him I didn't think it was appropriate. By the end of the night, just watching him interact with the kids, I saw something. A future that Maya could have, a father figure, something she never had. I'd made sure there wasn't a man around up to that point, but I couldn't help but think about family dinners where Maya, Daryl, and his kids, Marley and Stan, and I would be together at the table, talking like a normal family, sharing the details of our days. Daryl would take them out to the yard and toss around the football while I would bake something for them to eat when they came back in. It was all bullshit, of course. Daryl's relationship with Marley turned out to be just as bad as mine with Maya. They yelled at each other all the time. So did Maya and I. They didn't share meals at the dinner table. They scrounged around the kitchen for whatever they could find and went to their rooms to eat it. Marley was bad, but Stan was worse. He was a few years older and had just started driving. He'd gotten violent with Daryl a few times, something Daryl confessed to me on one of our dates. We both had so much baggage. We weren't good for each other. He at least could claim being a widower. I know that's terrible, but compared to me, widower sounded nice. I still just had to play it off like I just had a one-night stand and never saw the guy again. Only that didn't work with everyone. Most women I worked with tried to jog my memory, to get me to remember anything about the guy so they could track him down and force him to pay child support. Most men just gave me the line of, sorry he treated you that way. If you were my girl. But we all know what that means, and I wasn't ready for that kind of action. In some ways, Daryl was right for me. He took it slow. He really wanted somebody to complain to about his kids. Of course, he wanted sex, but I held back, telling him I wasn't ready. I was pretty certain I'd never be ready, but I didn't tell him that. Everything took a turn one day when I came home and Maya's bedroom was closed. That part was normal, but the car outside was not. I thought I'd recognized it, but I didn't want to admit it. I crept up to the bedroom door and listened. She was giggling, and the lower voice I heard was definitely Stan. I felt the fear trickle down my chest, almost preventing me from talking, but somehow I choked out a few words. Maya, I'm home. Can we talk a minute? I heard a loud sigh from behind the door. Then, I'm busy. What is it? I had to think of something. I really had nothing to say. Just come talk to your mother a minute. She obliged me and answered the door just a crack. Yes, she said. Are you with someone? I asked. Just a friend, doing homework. What do you want? Can I just say hi to your friend? I was going to pick up food. What would you guys like? She sighed again, louder this time, and then opened the door. Fine, it's just Stan. You know him. Stan leered at me. Miss Moretti? It was not a respectful address, but it was what I expected. I got their attention with the mention of pizza. Then after I called in the order, I called Daryl. He didn't like it either, but he had so little control of Stan at that point that he felt powerless to even talk to him about it. Kids like Stan, he said, you don't want to push them too much. They might push back. It was then I knew he feared his own son. From there, my relationship with Daryl deteriorated. I never wanted to go out because us being out meant Maya and Stan could be in by themselves. Though they still had held to the stance that they were just friends with similar taste in music, which I knew was bullshit because Maya never cared about Nine Inch Nails until Stan came along. And all of a sudden, she had posters of Trent Reznor on her walls, just like the ones in Stan's room. A few months later, I agreed to a dinner date with Daryl. He told me Stan was busy with his friends, playing some video game, to appease my concern. I knew our relationship was on the rocks, and maybe I thought I would save it that night. We ate good food, had a few too many drinks, and ended up back at his place. When he told me Marley was staying at a friend's house, I realized what all the setup was for. I was loose from liquor and lonely despite being in a relationship. Shortly after we got inside, we made it to the couch. Daryl was kissing me and pushed me down on the cushions. Maybe he thought this was sexy or something, but it stirred up those old fears. Still, I pushed them away, trying to have a good time. He was getting handsy as he lay on top of me, kissing my neck while I stared at the ceiling, trying not to see my stepdad's face. It didn't work, so I closed my eyes for a bit. When that didn't work either, I opened them to see Daryl going at the button on his pants. He dropped them to the floor, giving me a few claustrophobic free seconds when he wiggled them off his ankles. Then he went at my pants. I said no, and I pushed his hands back. When I saw the hurt look on his face, I felt horrible, so I smiled at him and stood up, leading him to his bedroom by the hand. When we got in, I could see the look on his face, pleading me to remove my pants before he would have to try again. I did, and soon we were on the bed. He really wanted to finish this, and I wanted him to be done. I just wanted it to be over. But I just wasn't into it, so nothing went easy. It felt terrible before we even got anywhere, and I was standing up and reaching for my panties as Darrell lay there with a half-limp dick looking at me like I just shit the bed. Needless to say, our relationship ended then. Maybe not cordially, but deep down I knew it was over. I drove home ashamed that my first consensual sexual encounter had ended how it had. I planned to just lock myself in my room, stopping only in the kitchen for a glass of water before I retired, when I heard it, crying, coming from Maya's room. I hadn't heard her cry in years. She always kept it from me, but I don't think she knew I'd come home. I went to her door, listening as my heart broke for her. I realized for a moment that her crying could be for reasons I'd hoped for. That night Stan was busy with friends. Maybe he blew her off and they broke up, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe we were both cutting ties with the father and son that weren't good for us. I knocked gently then. The sniffing stopped. I could tell she was holding her breath. She finally gave in and answered the door. She wouldn't tell me any details, though, just gave me the teenage shutout, even blaming her period, which I knew she shouldn't be on her cycle that week, so I had to wait. We didn't see Stan much after that, and I took it as a sign. Maybe I was right. Maybe it would lead left behind the Mayar boys, and we were going off to better and bigger things without them. Within a few weeks, Maya had a new boy she was doing homework with. Then 6 months later, it was another. This was right before she graduated Madison Middle, and I was going to Bremerton High. I was walking out of the teacher's lounge one day and saw Maya leaving the restroom further down the hall. She was tucking something into her backpack as a boy came out next. He patted her on the head like a dog. Both their cheeks were flushed. I couldn't help myself but walk towards her, calling her name. The boy saw me and took off. She wouldn't look at me and said, "What do you want, Mother?" I asked her what she'd been doing in the boys' restroom. She basically told me that I was old and blind and hadn't seen what I saw. I wanted to press her more, but she took off for her next class before I could. I should have I should have gone after her, demanded an explanation. Maybe then. Carrie saw the tears forming in her eyes again. Her hands were at her face, shoulders shaking. This time he did put an arm around her, and her face sunk into his chest, sobbing. He patted her gently, not sure what to say. It's okay, it was probably not applicable for or true for this story, so he was quiet for a solid minute. He was about to mumble out something when he heard her voice, soft and robotic. She was found dead 2 weeks ago today. Drug overdose. I didn't want to believe that my little girl, even born in the situation she was, could end up there. She was my salvation. She got me through so many of those tough times when I should have been on the edge of that cliff a lot sooner than today. But now, she's gone. I'd given my mom updates over the years, but I didn't think I could face her at the funeral. I didn't even tell her her only grandchild was dead. Today, weeks later, I had my phone out, her number on the screen, but it's too late. I can't call her now. What would I say at this point? In a normal situation, Carrie would tell her to call her mom right now. Better late than never. But he just met this woman on the edge of a cliff. He didn't feel it was his place to tell her what to do. Angela was looking at him with eyes that pleaded him to tell her she's not crazy, and that her life wasn't completely messed up. Come here, Carrie wrapped her into a hug. When they broke off, her face had softened. Fucked up, huh? Carrie shrugged. We all are. True, but don't. Angela waited for a minute, let out a deep breath, and patted him on the leg. So, what about you? Man, it's just not going to be as interesting, but just tell it. You asked. Carrie tried to smile and lighten the mood. When I get deep into a rabbit hole about my ex, just remember, you asked. Angela smiled and shrunk back into the couch cushions, looking relieved her story was over. Carrie began his story about his relationship with Laura, the things that he thought led to their divorce, and how pointless his existence was at Glaxcorp. So, after 15 years, she just decided she was done with you? Angela asked. I mean, it was a long drifting process. I was numb, drinking more than I should have at the time. I wasn't attentive to her needs, whatever the fuck that means. No, hell, I know what it means. But it felt like she was never full in it with me either. Always had something else on her mind. I don't even mean cheating, maybe, but it was just like after 10 years or so, she'd gotten all she could get out of me. Love dried up, if you will. That's sad, said Angela. I just thought bigger things broke up marriages. Not that I know. I've barely been in a relationship myself. It doesn't have to be bigger things. Carrie looked defeated, thinking about the sweatshirt he'd tossed in his room. Just tons of little ones that add up. Angela caught Carrie watching the clock. It was reaching 10 p.m. You gotta get to work soon, right? She asked. Shit, yeah. Would it be a surprise if I said I don't want to? She grabbed his arm. Then don't. Fuck it. What are they gonna do? Carrie put out his hands. Write me up? Possibly fire me? Really? Over missing one night? They've been strict lately since layoffs and all. As much as I hate this job, if I lose it, I'll be so broke I'll be back on that cliff by the end of next week. It was a dark joke they both chuckled at, then caught themselves. Well, don't do that. Angela's tone turned serious. I won't. Or you either, okay? She nodded, solemn. Hey, I should let you get ready then. Yeah, I guess so. Just let me walk you to your car. They climbed off his old couch and headed for the front door. Carrie was in his socks as Angela gave him a funny look. What? He said. We're just going to the driveway. They reached her door and hugged one more time. When they pulled away, Angela spoke. This was weird, Carrie, but I'm really glad I met you. It was weird, he agreed. I'm glad too. I don't know where we go from here. What do you mean? What's to stop us from going up there or doing something else in the future? She paused, staring into the dirt at his feet, the autumn wind blowing her dark hair across her face. She brushed it away and met his eyes. Each other. If you ever get that feeling again and it's too strong, you call me, any time, day or night. Carrie nodded. But your phone's broke, and smiled. I'll get a new one, just for that. A burner, huh? She laughed. Yep, it'll be my secret agent phone. You can be my Q or Moneypenny or whatever. I'm not sure how this works. Either way, can you write down your number for me? Yeah. He patted his pants pockets, knowing he didn't have a pen or paper in them. Hold on. She ducked into her car, and Carrie noticed the passenger seat was covered in trash, mail, bags, and from various fast food places, and a few canvases still wrapped in plastic. Angela popped back out, holding an envelope that stated Final Notice in big red letters, addressed from MasterCard. She handed it to him with a Bank of America pen with a blue hairband tied around the end. Just anywhere on there, she said. Okay, Carrie scribbled down his number. Hope you can read that. She took back the envelope and eyed his writing. Is that an 8 or a 9? 8, said Carrie. Sorry. She corrected it with her pen, then tucked it in her jeans. They fit along her thin frame, and despite their intimate conversation, Carrie felt odd studying her curves. He looked away. So that's that then, he said. Yeah, have a good night at work. Oh, you know it. Angela lingered outside her car for a few seconds before ducking in and closing the door. Carrie stayed in place as she rolled down her window. Thank you, she said, and drove off. That's the end of chapter 4. Come back next week for chapter 5.